was a little before 5 a.m. on Ukraine's Independence Day when 10 jet skis carrying a handful of Secret Service frogmen approached the western tip of Crimea. Under the cover of darkness, they slipped ashore, the first of Kiev's soldiers to stand on the peninsula in almost a decade, and made their way towards a nearby Russian base. In a little over an hour, they were back on the jet skis and beating a hasty retreat, pursued by Russian attack boats and fighter jets. In the interim, they had destroyed one of Moscow's most powerful electronic warfare systems and raised their flag over Crimea as a symbol of defiance. Even for Ukraine's armed forces, which are renowned for courage in the face of overwhelming odds, the raid stands out as perhaps the most daring that we know of. It was carried out by soldiers of the shadowy Timur Group, a real-life A-team who specialize in doing the impossible, typically deep behind enemy lines. The group were behind the liberation of Snake Island last year, fought in Bakhmut and on the southern front line, and recently recaptured several oil rigs off Crimea's west coast. This is the story of how 20 men delivered a devastating blow to Russian forces in Crimea and are now leading the fight for its liberation. This is the story of Ukraine's jet ski raiders. It was a plan so risky that British and American special forces warned the Ukrainians never to go through with it. But General Kirill Budanov wanted the Ukrainian flag raised over Crimea on Independence Day, and the men of the Timur Group were determined not to let him down. They were given a month to plan and train, devising a scheme that called for a 120-mile crossing of the Black Sea on jet skis that would need to be refueled twice en route. Once in Crimea, they would infiltrate a Russian base, blow up valuable anti-air systems, plant the flag, and then run for their lives, probably pursued by fighter jets and the feared Black Sea Fleet. The operation was dubbed The Force Awakens, a reference to the Star Wars film in which a ragtag band of rebels destroy a superweapon of the evil empire. It appeared, to all intents and purposes, like a suicide mission. And yet so many men from the Timur Group volunteered that commanders actually had to turn most of them away. Of course, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and so it proved in this case. The men made it to shore, navigating by the stars, as Russian jamming was so strong it even scrambled their compasses. But then, things started to go wrong. Just a few hundred feet from their objective, the Ukrainians were spotted by Russian sentries and a firefight broke out. With the option of stealth lost, the Ukrainians decided to go loud, returning fire on the Russians and using rocket launchers to take out the radar instead of their preferred C4. Mission accomplished, they scrambled back to the jet skis and took off, pursued by 5 Russian attack boats and jets that were taking it in turns to fly sorties against them. For the next 5 hours, they struggled back across open water, assisted by some of their own attack boats, which fired Stinger anti-air missiles to drive the Russian jets away. As dawn broke, they made it back to friendly shores, somehow with all 20 men still alive. Borghese, the commander who led the mission, described it as nothing short of a miracle. When Ukraine revealed footage of the raid to the world shortly after, it appeared unlike anything they had attempted before. But, in fact, it was not the first time that the men of the Timur Group had been charged with raising their flag on occupied soil. Because, unbeknownst to most, they had in fact been behind the liberation of Snake Island from the Russians a little over a year before. The island, a small but strategic spit of land in the middle of the Black Sea, had been captured by Russia on the first day of the war and used to house anti-air batteries. It was protected by the Black Sea Fleet, but after the Moskva was sunk, the rest of the warships withdrew from the area, making the island vulnerable. That allowed Ukraine to pepper it with artillery and drones before the Timur Group was dispatched to put boots on the ground. In July last year, they took part in a raid to raise the Ukrainian flag over the island. As a point of pride, they asked General Budanov whether they could take the largest flag from Odessa for the mission. He told them they could, but only if they raised it on the east side of the island. That is, the side that looks toward Crimea, as a message to Russia about where they would strike next. Just like in Crimea, the operation proved a huge success, degrading Russian anti-air systems and providing a huge propaganda victory for Kiev. The Timir group also led the mission that recaptured a series of oil rigs off Crimea's west coast in August this year, again degrading Russian anti-air in the process. Before that, the unit is known to have taken part in the battle for Bakhmut and to have fought on the Zaporizhia front. There is even a suspicion that they were involved in raids across the Dnipro River that have established a Ukrainian bridgehead on the Russian side, and perhaps even the failed raid on the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant last year. In the words of Timur, the group's commander, who shares a code name with his unit, their job is simply to prepare everything for the advance of the armed forces. That involves both frontline assaults and covert operations to eliminate Russian command posts, kill Russian officers, and divert attention from Ukraine's other ground attacks. The number of men under his command is a closely guarded secret, but it is thought to be well in excess of a typical Special Forces detachment. Asked where his unit operates at the moment, Timur told French newspaper Le Monde that they are in the north of the country, meaning near the Russian border. But he would not say any more than that. Timur has vowed that his men will keep liberating territory by sea, a clear reference to the liberation of Crimea, which President Zelensky and his advisors believe will end the war. Certainly, since the Independence Day raid, the peninsula has looked a lot more vulnerable. Without its powerful jamming equipment, Ukraine has managed to repeatedly hit Crimea with Storm Shadow missiles that have blown up a tank landing ship and a submarine. And they destroyed the Black Sea Fleet headquarters, wiping out dozens of officers that may have included the Fleet Admiral. And they have even managed to launch another jet ski raid and raise the flag on Crimea a second time, during which they wiped out a significant number of Russian troops. Kiev has employed this tactic once before in the mission to recapture Kherson, which was relentlessly bombed until Russian units fled their positions and the Ukrainians rolled in. It appears they are trying the same strategy in Crimea, with the men of the Timur group at the tip of the spear. Speaking to the Times newspaper, the group's deputy commander summed it up by saying, "You can see that after we landed on the peninsula, a lot of interesting things started to happen. I can tell you that this mission triggered all of it. We now have the means to plan and execute even larger operations. There is a lot more to come." Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this.